Introduce the council, Councillor Robin Jubenville, Councillor Marilyn Petito Devaney, Councillor Eileen Duff, Councillor Prince Kennedy. And I'm going to read a letter from the governor into the record. Dear councillors, pursuant to the provisions of the Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 27, Section 4, I am pleased to nominate for reappointment Colette M Santa as a member of the Parole Board to a term expiring March 8th, 2027. I appreciate your consideration of this nominee. The resume is attached for your convenience. Sincerely, Charles D. Baker. And with that, we'll open Board Member Santa, if you'd like to introduce who you have here, and then we can bring forward your first witness.
With me today is Executive Director from the Parole Board.
Thank you for being here.
Attorney Aidan Welker. There will be my two speakers today. Also with me in support is Institutional Parole Officer Team 4 back there.
Good morning.
Daughter Maria, that is sitting behind me.
If you'd like, we can have whoever you'd like to speak first come forward. Yes.
Like me to sit.
That seat would be fine.
Is this someone's?
That's fine.
Good morning, councilors.
Good morning.
My name is Kevin Keefe, and I'm the Executive Director at the Parole Board. Thank you all for allowing me a few moments this morning to speak on behalf of Santa. I've had the privilege of knowing Colette since she first came to the agency from the Massachusetts Department of Correction in March of 2016. At that time, I was the Chief of Services and worked closely with Colette. She immediately impressed me with a number of strengths: her intelligence, her dedication, her commitment, her compassion, her pride in her work. As the Chief of the Transitional Services Unit, she sought to improve the standards for her unit and for the agency as a whole. In 2017, she led an agency-wide effort for accreditation by the American Correctional Association, or ACA. In doing that work, she utilized a teamwork approach within her staff and with other unit managers to ensure that all units participated in the accreditation efforts. While the ACA standards provide a minimum for correctional authorities and paroling authorities, Colette's commitment goes far beyond that, and she is mission-driven. Second chances, she believes in rehabilitation, and she believes in responsible reintegration. She has spent decades working in the corrections field. The transition to parole was a natural one for her. We spoke about her last stop with the Department of Correction at the Northeast Correctional Center, also known as the Concord Farm, where she had the opportunity to assist people that were at the minimum and pre-release level of security. She took great satisfaction and gratification in taking some part and some role in people transitioning into the community, finding work, and taking the final steps toward reentry and reunification. I was thrilled for Colette when she was first nominated for the board back in late 2017. I felt that she would bring a relatively unique combination of skills, experiences, and characteristics to the work with the board. As this body well knows, the Parole Board enabling statute requires, in addition, that at least one member have experience in forensic psychology, that each member of the board have be a graduate of a 4-year accredited college or university and have at least 5 years of experience in at least one of the following: parole, probation, corrections, law enforcement, psychology, psychiatry, sociology, or social work. Colette far exceeds the requirements in both education and experience. She has attained a bachelor's degree, Juris Doctorate, a master's in public administration. She continued her educational efforts when she got on the board, attaining a certification in drug and alcohol counseling. She also significantly exceeds the experience and training, having, as I noted, worked decades in the corrections sphere, and now over 6 years with parole. She brings language skills as our only Spanish-speaking board member, as well as diversity. Her education, skills, and abilities lend themselves very well to a primary function for a board member: application of the statutory legal standard, a required finding by the board in making a release decision that if an individual is released with appropriate conditions and supervision, they will live and remain at liberty without violating the law, and that their release is not incompatible with the welfare of society. Application of that standard requires the ability to comprehend and give proper context to voluminous information, including correctional reports, law enforcement records, assessments, substance use, and mental health evaluations. Similar to a judge, a board member is not an expert in all areas. However, they must have the ability to understand and incorporate a lot of information and expert opinions in their decision-making process. Colette, based upon her extensive education, training, and experience, has a superior ability to understand and apply the board's legal standard in each case. I've had the opportunity to observe her demeanor, particularly during life sentence hearings. She maintains a professional and reassuring disposition. I've seen her interrupt questioning during hearing when she sees a witness struggling, to check in with them and provide them with a moment to gather their thoughts, to rephrase a response, and/or to consult with counsel, as well as to rephrase her question if needed. She's careful not to repeat areas of questioning that have already been asked and answered. She has the ability to look beyond what a person has done in the past to see the person they are today and their potential for the future. This is a key trait for a board member or any staff person with the parole board. During her time as a board member, Colette has gone above and beyond to serve the agency and the Commonwealth. She's continued to coordinate the agency's ACA accreditation and reaccreditation. She was recently named an ACA commissioner. She has spent considerable time and effort working on special commissions, most recently the Commission on Structural Racism in the parole process. She does all of this while maintaining a significant volume of weekly parole hearings. I have no doubt, if confirmed, that Colette will continue to serve the agency and the Commonwealth at the highest level of commitment and with a progressive approach toward rehabilitation. I wholeheartedly endorse her candidacy for a second term with the Parole Board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go around and give the counselors opportunity if they have any questions. Counselor Jubenville?
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So the parole board, so how are they doing on paroling people?
In my estimation, there's always, in all areas of work, there's always room for improvement, but I think the parole board applies the legal standard in each case. And I think in terms of what they've done, particularly since Colette has sat on the board, and I know a lot of focus is put on life sentence cases. I will say this, and there's been some controversy over the length of decisions, but I will tell you, looking at the statistics, which don't lie, in the last 4 calendar years in which Colette has sat on the board, this board has decided more life sentence cases than any other board going back. And I looked at statistics back to 1990, the 80s. The statistics really don't separate out for life sentence, but they've decided a higher volume of life sentence cases in that time period. And they've given more positive votes than any other board in any 4-year period by far in history since 1990. So I think, there's ebb and flow year to year in terms of percentages. And I don't know that it's a litmus test for the percentage that they should parole in a given year, but I think this board takes its obligation seriously and does apply that legal standard in each and every case.
How about parole in non-life cases?
I think that fluctuates. Our 2021 report is in final vetting, so I'm hoping in the not too distant future that will be out. But I think the board was above 60% in terms of its overall paroling rate. It tends to be that the House of Correction paroling rate is higher than the state rate. As you know, those state cases involve some more serious serious offenses and serious histories in terms of adjustment in the institution and so forth. So typically the rate is lower for the state cases, but overall, I think that's going to show plus 60. And it's fluctuated, within the 50s and 60s, but usually they get positive votes in the majority cases. On some occasions, the state cases, it'll fluctuate a little bit below 50% in some years. Those life sentence cases I spoke about, I believe 2020 was 49%. The 21 final figures are coming in, but I think you're going to have a similar rate with that. And if you look historically, the annual reports are a public record either on our website or in the state archives. You'll see the trend has been, you've seen in the 90s, I think the percentages were in the teens as far as positive votes. In fact, if you look at the total number of positive votes for life sentence cases in the 90s, I think the last 2 years alone, the board's exceeded that in terms of the number of positive votes. So I think you have a board that's willing to give people due consideration. Not that there are, and I do acknowledge there's plenty of work for us to do, plenty of areas of improvement for us to make. But since Colette has been on this board, and it's not only her, there's other members, and all criticisms aside, they deal with a higher volume than any other board member has historically. In terms of those most complicated cases, the volume of the other cases has gone down, and fortunately, the prison population has gone down as I think, some of the criminal justice reforms have taken hold and CSG, more work to done on that. We're only at the beginning of that, I think. I think there's more to do in terms of diverting people from prison and diverting people in terms of revocations as well.
What's the issue with the decision?
There's a number of factors that go into the decisions. As you know, they're very complex cases.
Getting them out to the side.
Getting them out. So, initially after a hearing is held, there's a 2-week period during which the administrative record is kept open. In some cases, attorneys will ask for additional time. In some cases, the board is looking for additional information. There's a deliberation process within the board, and then there's final vetting with the general counsel's office. And there's been quite a bit of litigation over the years. So there's got to be some level of certainty that the final decision is that legal standard, and so that we're not dealing with unnecessary litigation, that the board's kept to their legal standard in each and every case.
Is there a rule or regulation about the amount of time you should have a decision on?
There isn't presently. I know there's pending legislation and recommendations anywhere from 60 to 90 days. I think presently we're going through a retooling process within general counsel's office. We've got some additional administrative support, and I think in the last month, they've issued at least in excess of 20 decisions. I think over the next several months, they're going to be able to get that window down. I don't, in terms of what that magic number is, 60 or 90 days, I think it's difficult, particularly in the more complex cases where there's additional information to review, or where you have as many as 2 binders that thick that the board's got to go through and deliberate in addition to the hearing record itself. Additional materials that are submitted after the hearing. So, but I think we'll be able to get more towards that 90-day period as we progress over the next several months. And I know that's been problematic over time, and an ebb and flow as far as how long the decisions take. But it is an area that we continue to work with prospects of improving over the next several months.
So would it be better, in your opinion, to have a 90-day rule, 90-day law?
I'm not certain. I would think there would need to be some exceptions or some leeway in there for cases in which additional information is either going to be submitted by attorneys, or the board needs additional information. So there would need to be some flexibility, but I think in a case where everything's on the record, I think if there were a regulation, I would think that that would be, the board would be able.
And this nominee, what is her voting record in your opinion?
I believe that she has, and I don't have statistics for individual board members in front of me, but I think she has always been amongst the highest in terms of giving people a positive vote.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Counselor Devaney. You have any questions for the witness?
No.
I'm sorry, no?
I didn't say anything.
Okay, do you have any questions for the witness?
Questions, Marilyn, you can go before me.
Usually you raise your hand to ask. I didn't raise my hand.
Okay, sure. Counselor Duff.
Okay, sure, thank you. Thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it. I'm curious because there's been a lot of talk about this ACA, which I know a lot about. It's not really an accreditation that has a lot of prestige to it, and it has really nothing to do with the board. No other chair in the history, this is not a political thing, has ever applied for this and has made decisions, financial decisions, to not apply for it. But if this administration decided to, why, with all the legal staff they have, would they send a board member when we've been down a board member? She's missed almost 17% of the work year going to these meetings. I mean, it just seems to me like a very, and do you approve this as the applicant?
I don't think she's missed 17% of hearings due to the ACA.
And I'm not going to argue that with you, but are you the one that approves
Yeah,
this?
and I don't want to argue in terms of missed hearings, but in terms of that due to the ACA obligation, I don't think missing hearings is related necessarily to that. It's very few. She goes to 2 conferences per year for that.
So she only misses 2 days a year?
Due to that,
ACA.
all board members, as you know, have vacation, personal.
No, I understand that. I'm not talking about
That-
that at all. That's not what I'm talking about. But are you the one that approved this ACA?
Absolutely.
Why, I'm just curious, with such, although this board has a plethora of resources no other board has ever had, why on earth, when you have been down member of the board for so long, and there's been holdovers and holdovers and holdovers, why would you send a board member to this and not one of the multiple legal staff you have?
Her attendance at these conferences has not
It's not the answer.
impacted the ability to do.
It's not my question. That's not the question is about her. My question is to you, why would you make that choice? Why would you, when you're short-staffed already with board, why would you take a board member off of hearings?
I think when you're talking about trying to establish standards for an agency, you have to have at least a floor. And I don't, whether we had ACA accreditation or not, I think that's the floor. There's a lot more work to be done. I agree with you that that's not the be-all and end-all, have that accreditation, but that's a floor, that's a minimum. And then there's more that I think that we have to do as an agency. So I appreciate all her efforts in that regard, but I would agree with you that that's just the minimum. I think Colette would have just established.
I understand that, sir. And I understand that she's only missed 2 meetings a year because of this. What I don't understand, while you as the executive director, short-staffed, take you told us how valuable she is. Why on earth would you use that instead of one of your lawyers? Because we'd already met. The floor had already been met previously. It collapsed under Chairman Tressler. We know that to be true. That has been validated to me from this administration that he essentially, I mean, he told us in his hearing, in 4+ years, he only ever looked at one pardon application. I can't even speak to that. That's so outrageous to me to be so negligent of your job. But my question that you haven't answered yet is why would you, as the executive director, take such a valuable resource instead of one of the multiple other resources you had? It seems like an odd choice and an odd judgment.
It was,
So we'd already met that standard. The ACA really isn't an important standard in parole. It's not.
I would beg to differ, but.
I know you would.
Yeah.
But can you just answer the question why you chose to send her and not a legal?
Yes, and I've tried to, I think that, I think it's important to have that minimum standard.
Yeah.
I think she holds particular expertise in that area, and I think she was a key person. And I would not have approved of it unless we could sustain the operations of the board, including hearings. If I thought that would have been impacted negatively, I would not have approved it, neither would the chair.
Okay, that's fair. And so, why would you choose a board member with so little experience over some of the board members with so much more experience?
In terms of ACA, there's no other board.
In terms of ACA, in terms of the actual job of parole, of their actual expertise.
I'm sorry, she has decades of experience in.
Not on the parole board, she does not. She has decades of experience jumping from job to job the year. She doesn't have decades of experience in parole. So why would you, I'm just curious.
I'm sorry, choose for what? Because I don't choose.
What you just told me, you chose her to go to this ACA. You didn't choose her to go?
She did this in 2017. I was the chief of field services. I had nothing to do with.
Oh, so you had
Nothing to do with her being that point person on it. I worked with her as a fellow manager.
Okay.
Got to know her through that process.
Did her to this? It wasn't you. I was under the impression it was you.
No, it was Chairman Tressler at the time.
Makes sense. Okay, terrific. How would you say her recidivism rate is? We know that she has a high parole rate. How often do those people reoffend? Because those are the numbers, because we haven't, we used to get reports all the time. The chair used to come and report to us about individual people, but we haven't seen that. So how's her recidivism?
Yeah.
That's the number that counts.
We have statistics for the agency as a whole, but in terms of individual board members, that would take some more work to produce
Well,
that.
it's not hard, honestly, because we've always done it. It's always been done. It was the precedent. I mean, it's not hard to do. So you don't have any idea what her recidivism rate is?
Other than what we report annually.
What you just said to me is you only do it as a group. You're not doing individual.
No, we don't look at that.
Why?
We don't look at that because that's a matter of supervision when they're in the community. I wouldn't put that on necessarily on Colette individually. The board works in panels and groups, and particularly in life sentence hearings, it's a full board decision. So I think reporting those statistics as a group is the most important fact.
So then, okay, so that follows then that her individual parole rates don't matter at all. And yet you've just touted them as something to be proud of.
It's subject to opinion when.
They're not mutually exclusive, so it's one or the other. So her individual parole rates, therefore, are you saying really don't matter?
I'm not saying that at all. That's a matter for you to determine.
No, I'm asking you for your opinion. You're the executive director. I want you to tell me.
I think it matters that people are willing to parole individuals that have shown that they're ready to live in the community and have some probability of living in the community without violating the law. I think that's a key element for any board member, that they're willing to do that.
Correct, but just paroling people, that's not the goal of the parole board, okay? We all understand that. This is not about just letting people out. This happened after, Councilor Devaney has talked passionately and eloquently about this many times after the Sinelli incident. The agency was so demoralized, it was restructured to get that bottom line or ceiling. They achieved it very, very successfully, albeit at great pain internally and externally. But one of the big lessons from Sinelli is we don't just, the parole rate is important, the recidivism rate is more important. Okay. So if you're just saying, I'm letting you out and they're back in a week, you failed. And I'm fascinated, and this is not an attack, I'm very fascinated by this, because every other administration and every other board has always tracked these numbers. It's simple. This is not hard. This is not even math. This is arithmetic, okay? And I know you know the difference, but you've very specifically chosen not to. So I have to conclude that her parole rate doesn't matter. Because if her recidivism rate doesn't matter, her parole rate doesn't, correct? That's a yes. No, that's a yes or no question. Do you agree? That's a yes or no question.
No, I don't agree.
You don't agree. So the answer is no.
The answer is, yeah, I don't agree with your premise.
Tell me, can you repeat back to me my premise?
That her paroling rate doesn't matter because we're not reporting her individual regarding recidivism.
Okay, and so, okay, great, you got it, I understand. I just want to make sure we're talking the same language.
Yeah.
So you don't think recidivism matters?
I obviously recidivism matters, but recidivism's complicated in terms of when a parole board member paroles somebody, they're paroling somebody to supervision under a parole officer. The large majority of my time with the agency is as a field parole officer. I'm in my 32nd year with the agency. So it's turned over at that point for supervision to a parole officer. And that's where the rubber hits the road. And it's multifactored. It has to do with personal accountability on the part of the person who's paroled. It has to do with supervision practices and so forth. So to put that on an individual board member, I think would be, to a great extent, unfair, because we're asking them to make a decision. We're asking them to release people, and then they're responsible for everything thereafter.
So is it true then that is why the parole people on the board go to certain prisons or jails, and then the same board member, to follow through with what you're saying with your logic, which makes a lot of sense. So then the board member who goes to, I live in Middleton, you go to Middleton, then that board member would be, it's the same. You're not sending different people to different places, because then you have no coherence, and you have no relationships with the people in the prisons that actually know these prisoners. So you keep everything uniform, so there's no, so everyone's on the same page?
The schedule varies, but depending on how many board members that are on the board at a given time. Unfortunately, we've had 6 board members only for going on over a year now.
But that's been a choice that the governor has made.
Depending on leave time for various.
Say you have a full board.
So
Let's just go theoretically. You have a full board, and that's how it works.
Yeah.
You go to Middleton, you're not sending someone from Pittsfield to Middleton, because that would be stupid, right? That would be a waste of resources.
Generally speaking, no, yeah.
If there's an emergency.
There are exceptions.
It's not the norm. The norm, because the way that it's written, and that's why we were so excited to get board member Kalkos, is because we had nobody in my district. We've had nobody. So now instead of sending someone from Worcester, he does that. Because the state is paying for the automobiles and the gas. That's out of the taxpayer's dollar, right? So we know, because we can document this, we can ask for, these things. This is not hard to find. So we know that you're keeping it, there's no playing around with this stuff. Okay, that's good. You indicated you've seen her conduct hearings?
I've seen her conduct life sentence hearings.
Life sentences, not regular hearings. Have you been with her in the institutions?
I have not been with her in the institution.
In your capacity as the executive director, from other staff, have you ever had any complaints about her?
I have not.
You've never had complaints about her from any staff?
I've been the executive director since 2009. Received one.
Fair enough, I believe you. And is it unusual for the union not to send a letter of support? In the 10 years I've been here, they always have.
I was a member of the union and I'm only familiar with them sending one for autonomy.
They've sent one for most people. Okay. How would you say the morale is of the agency?
I think it varies. We have, I think my time with the agency, you're always going to have a group of people with experience, disgruntled no matter who is in charge. And you're going to have a variation. I'd say overall, it's good, but I think it took a hit with COVID. I think in all sectors it did, because we asked people to continue to do their job without interruption during the pandemic. We were exposed to some very risky situations. Yeah. Job done, and I understand that that people aren't happy with that, and I also understand that people occasionally, based on personnel decisions, having been a manager, that there are hard feelings when personnel decisions are made. So I think there's always going to be a percentage of people that are unhappy based on decisions that are made. Overall, I think we have I have to say, particularly over the last 3 years, that our staff, we have many, many dedicated and committed staff who have stepped up and continued to do their job under very difficult circumstances. And I'm thankful for the staff we have and for the board members. Again, not to say there isn't room for improvement on my end in terms of morale, because I know there are people, there obviously are people that are unhappy. Some people, I think, they're not going to be pleased no matter what I do. Other people have specific issues that they're disgruntled about.
It's always true. I have a master's in business and organizational development. But there is an ebb and flow. There are different parts of that. Can be graph, you can even put it on a graph if you want. So you think morale is good. That's good. I'm happy to hear that. So, did you say you were a TPO?
I started out, back in the day when I started, they called us junior parole officers. It's now called TPO, transition.
It's a civil service.
Civil service.
It's a civil service, which is a bare minimal, grade exam. So there's a lot of concern. There's going to be no weather bill. Now, did you approve that?
No, I was the chief of field services when she.
She worked with Ms. Santa at Concord DOC, and she failed the civil service exam total 3 times. Yet she was promoted to be a deputy supervisor, to supervise people, to supervise parole officers, even though she'd never passed the exam and she'd never actually done their job. She never had done the job of the people she was supervising, and she failed the exam 3 times. Now she's promoted to the chief of institutional parole. The only analogy I can make is that is like a paralegal supervising a law partner. That has, I can tell you, deeply affected people in the field, and made people really concerned. I know parole in the last years has lost so much institutional knowledge because of decisions like this. It is a public safety issue, and that's one of the reasons I'm concerned about this. And I know for a fact there have been many, many complaints, but she's never been removed.
I can speak to, since I've been the executive director in late 2019, I have had no complaints lodged against Ms. Worthing during that time period. I can speak to, as far as having worked with her, is that She's worked hard to make improvements in herself. She's gone back to school and gotten a master's degree in public administration. She's attended a leadership training from the national.
I understand that, sir, but she never passed the exam. It's like having a paralegal supervising law partners. Do you not see anything wrong with that?
I know many people who are not good test takers, who are.
I'm not either, I'm dyslexic. There are accommodations for that.
Yeah, even with accommodations, some people simply are not good test takers. I've
Sad.
worked with people who have been managers who don't do well on tests.
I understand that.
And other managers in that.
Feeling is, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting.
Oh, no, that's,
We're gonna have a long hearing,
yeah.
and we've got another one this afternoon. So your feeling is she's just not a good test taker?
I think.
You're on the you will go on the record today saying that your feeling about her is she's fine in the position, she's competent and does a good job, she just doesn't test well.
I think,
Do you agree with me?
yes, as
Statement, she just doesn't test well, but she does a good job.
as with all of us, we can all stand improvement.
That is a given. We understand, all of us, myself, very much. Are you aware of her miscalculations of dates and directions that have put public safety at risk? Not to mention the potential lawsuits against the state, and that these are repeatedly caught by real parole officers, by people she's actually supervising? Are you aware of this? Has anyone ever brought that to your attention?
Date computations are primarily the responsibility of the institutional parole officer, but there is some, they do confer with the management team at various times. I'm not aware of any lawsuits that Ms. Weatherby has exposed the agency to
Okay,
due to date calculations.
get it. Have you seen the YouTube video?
I'm not,
The YouTube video that she did you approve it?
I'm not familiar with that.
The one that she talks about her 63 moving violations, and she's gotta be better about all the tickets she gets while she's working for the state?
I'm not familiar. I
You didn't
know,
approve it. I will just tell you, it's incredibly embarrassing, not just to the agency, but to the governor. If I were Governor Baker, I would be apoplectic that someone had done this. Words cannot describe.
I can tell you she hasn't received any moving violations.
So she lied on her video?
Well, that was, I think it was stated that she had moving violations.
She stated it. I'm not making it up. I'm quoting her.
Yeah,
So this is a video she did to Pittsburgh State. It's quite famous, actually. It's quite a discussion in the public safety world. It's quite, she's a YouTube sensation. Are you aware, or have you ever heard that the new deputy, John Spinelli, called staff aside to find out who had spoken to Jean Tracine for the article she wrote? I mean, I spoke to her, I'm on the record. You're not aware that anyone made threats, veiled threats to staff? You're not aware of any pressure to see who spoke
that is,
to Tracine? You're not aware of any of that?
I'm not aware of.
Not aware of any of that. And you've stated in emails that Colette has your full support. You don't feel there's any demoralization there's a few people, as always, that might be unhappy, but you would say, as a whole, the agency is incredibly happy. It's well functioning, there's good spirits, it's a good team.
Yeah, I don't know that I would use the term incredibly happy, but I think people
Good spirits, there's not,
people like their jobs overall.
there's no discontent.
It's difficult work. There's always going to be levels of discontent, but
Of course there are. But you don't feel that there's any political nepotism in this agency? None. Okay. In that it doesn't really matter if the person is competent, people just because I'm on the record of saying this since this governor came in. And you can completely disagree with me because I don't work there. But I follow it very, very closely. And, you know, I have publicly said many times, because I'm passionate about this, and I want it to be the best. I want victims to be safe. I want people to succeed. It's why, you know, when they put Josh Wall in charge, he instituted a step down. That's why he brought it to a baseline. We came to a baseline. Decisions were out often in 30 days. There's no reason, listen, they're not even writing their own decisions anymore. That is astounding to me. I don't even know how it's legal that you can have somebody who's not in the room write a decision about something. But I'm not the governor. The governor's made that decision. And since you've told me today the agency hasn't been sued for anything,
I wouldn't say they haven't been sued for it. The agency's sued every day for a variety of.
sued all the time too, but there are suits and there are suits. There are things that are real and there are things that are frivolous. And we get that. Listen, we get sued all the time, you know? I understand that. I'm not about that. But I am concerned, you know, and I've said many times that this agency has been been loaded with political nepotism and is the, you know, the stepchild of the public safety of criminal justice. I mean, it's just, you know, and you're absolutely right. You know, Chairman Tressler really, I think is grossly negligent. I've gone on the record many times saying that. I've said it to him. I've had conversations with him since he's gone to the bench about it. I think what he did was just beyond anything I can imagine, to not care, to really not care about people who have filed and to not read the applications, because we know there are hundreds of them and people are just languishing, waiting for this. But he admitted that, and that's bygones. But there's been so much institutional loss. There have been people let go who have been career people. Right before the pensions kicked in, they've been let go. But back to Tressler, he didn't do the work. So this one, Ms. Maroney has had to pick up the slack. I know they're buddies. I know they all come out of the same office. And, you know, she's applied to be a judge. So now we're going to see everything's going to stop moving, right? We know that. All of a sudden we're getting decisions when people have been waiting, you know, 11 months for a decision. If your kid had been murdered and you were waiting 11 months, to me, that's unconscionable. Unconscionable. But anyway, thank you for your time. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Kennedy.
I just have one question to follow up on that. We used to get individual parole board members' rates of parole. We got those numbers. They're not that hard to pull together. Certainly something that's important for us to look at, because I think the majority of this council is supportive of parole. And when you just throw out a number of 60% for an agency, well, one person could be 25%. Another person could be 85%. How are we supposed to judge if we don't have those numbers?
I can certainly look into that. I know prior.
We've asked over the years. We used to get them on a regular basis. We don't get them anymore.
You're asking me, so I'll, you know,
I would really like to see those.
I can certainly take that back, but I understand that hasn't been done, and so
Where do you get those from?
I can go back and find out. I have to talk to our research coordinator and the chair and see
I
what.
don't think it's that hard,
It's arithmetic, it's not math.
you know? I would like to see those numbers, because we, you know, it's not about this particular nominee that I'm talking about. She seems to have a high parole rate. I got a letter complaining that they were too high, you know? But I don't know, we're blind.
The recidivism rate we need to see.
But we're also just blind, we don't know, because we don't have the numbers, you know? Is that a fair thing for us to ask for? Will you give a commitment that you'll get us those numbers?
I'm going to Final decisions are vetted through the chair and general counsel's office, but I'm committed, I'm taking that back, and I will get you an answer on that.
It's not a commitment to give me the numbers.
I don't make decisions in a vacuum, it's.
We asked before.
It's the last two chairs.
I just don't know why we don't get them every time there's a nominee before us. And we've asked for them over and over and over again. It makes it look like somebody's hiding something. That's what it looks like.
I certainly don't have anything to hide.
I'm just saying, but you know what I mean? Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Hurley, do you have any questions for
Yes, I
the?
do. I'm not sure, but, are you living in a cloud someplace?
Been with the agency for 32 years, ma'am.
And you don't know about a lot of the things that have been brought up this morning?
I don't, I'm telling you that I have not received complaints. I have not received any complaints. There's been no grievances against the individual that Councilor Duff had mentioned
Do
earlier.
you work in the same office building?
Yes,
You engage in conversations with people?
yes.
And you're telling me you don't know about any of these issues?
I know that people sometimes have difficulty with management styles, sure, yeah, but in terms of any sorts of complaints, I've received, when I talk about, a complaint is serious to me, or a grievance, and I would work with the unions. I speak on a regular basis with the field parole officers union, which also covers the institutional parole officers. And I've told them, and from time to time, there's been issues that have been discussed at labor management meetings in terms of whether they've been having problems with what a manager has done. I consider that discussions for labor management, but in terms of a complaint where somebody comes to me and says that the person has done something that's grievable, that's wrong, that needs to be addressed, I have not received that. But in terms of complaints, sure, we deal with that at labor management all the time, but in terms of an actual complaint, I have not received anything.
Did the agency get sued within the last year and a half by someone who was let go, who alleged that she had been harassed and basically tortured by some of the employees there?
I've been the executive director since late 2019. I'm not familiar with any lawsuits of that nature since that period.
Was a legal claim filed by an attorney on behalf of someone?
Since I've
That
been,
was settled. That was settled.
since I've been executive director, I'm not aware of any.
How long have you been executive director?
Since late 2019.
Okay. Because I got phone calls from people who complained that this woman who was hired was set up because people inside that were alleged to be associated with this nominee happy, and she wasn't happy because it wasn't one of their people.
I'm not familiar with the specifics of that. At that time, I would tell you, since 2019, no. Prior to that, I was the chief of field services, so I dealt with field services issues. If there was an issue within institutional services, I would not have dealt with it, and without knowing more, and I certainly wouldn't want to discuss individual personnel matters for people, but without knowing more in terms of who that person is that complained, or if there were some sort of action filed, I imagine it would have been handled by the general counsel's office at the time.
Well, there was referenced in one of the letters I saw that was emailed to me that someone was improperly denied promotion, brought a legal action, and that legal action was settled by the Commonwealth.
Is this is one and the same person, or?
I don't know, they didn't mention any names. But I also got a phone call from an employee that's petrified that this nominee is going to come back. And that if there's a change in administration, she's going to become the chair. Petrified. And the woman was scared to death because she's still working there. She told me of many instances where there was harassment, there was cronyism, there was certainly unfair action in promoting people who didn't have the basic skill set, who couldn't pass the tests. And it was on her watch. Now, I don't care about people. There's civil service, there's testing requirements. You're telling me that this agency hires people who flunk the tests and keep them there? Seriously?
You talking again about Ms. Weatherby?
I don't know who the person is. I don't know their name.
Yeah. Well, this is what Councilor Duff had asked about earlier, so talking specifically about her. She would have had to have passed the test to be in the position of a transitional officer with the agency. You cannot get a job as a transitional parole officer. Managers are not subject to testing. We've had managers on the transitional services side of the house that have never taken the civil services.
Maybe you should start having them take tests to make sure that they are competent. Would you agree with that?
Having managers take tests, I'm not familiar with at least within my agency or in corrections that managers take tests. I think other positions do, supervisory positions do, but I'm not familiar with managers taking tests. There are certain, obviously, experience requirements and other things that I think go into that decision. Again, in terms of that promotion, I have worked with Ms. Weatherby. She's worked hard. She's gone on and got her master's degree in public administration. She's taken leadership courses at the National Institute of Corrections. She was one of the people during the pandemic that probably worked hardest, short-staffed at that time. She's got some help now, but that she went into institutions and was exposed to new things. So was committed to the work. So I will say that. In terms of the test, yeah, she apparently had failed a promotional exam for a supervisory position, and there's many people that don't well on tests. But we've had other managers within that unit that never took a civil service test at all, that might have come over from the Department of Corrections, a prior chief.
But at least they have credentials.
Yes, they have experience in the field. Typically, the managers, from what I've seen, have at least 10 years of experience in corrections and or parole, if they're hired for a manager with the agency. I rarely would I see someone without that level of experience being in a management position, and certainly not in my tenure. We haven't had that.
Whether you can provide us with all of the rates for all of the parole board members. I find it hard to believe that you cannot provide us with this nominee's rates and the rates of recidivism within a week.
I will certainly take that back.
Well, let's put it this way. If I don't get it and I have to vote on somebody else, I'm voting no. Right? And I would love to have somebody give us a chart of the organization of the parole board and the IOSs and the IOAPs and the ABCs and the XYZs and whatever else goes with it, because it is totally confusing to me. You have in-prison parole board people or parole people. You have people who supervise parole people outside. They have all these different initials and whatever else goes with it. And nobody talks in terms of what those initials stand for, what that job description is. And as long as I've been here, I've heard how bad the parole board is.
I can give you a presentation on it if, obviously we can't do that here today, but I could if you would want.
I want somebody to give it to me in writing. The top, board members?
An organizational chart. Yeah, we have that. I can get that to you, absolutely.
Amazing. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Council?
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Devaney?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I didn't ask questions of this, witness because he's coming in support. If I want to know about the department, I'm going to contact, which I do, the parole department. And I don't think I should be taking up the time. My question is to the nominee. I agree 1,000% with my colleague, Councilor Hurley. She stole my words, exactly right. But let's focus on the nominee. The other thing I want to say is, I have asked for just one hearing, and they voted against me. And we have to be at 12 o'clock at assembly.
Counselor,
We have 1 o'clock.
Counselor,
So-
can we save this comment for the appropriate
I'm
time?
just telling you, we should be.
Understood, Counselor.
The nominee. Okay?
Understood.
And I thank you for coming in and.
Thank you, Counselor.
That's all I'm saying.
Counselor Ferreira, any questions for the witness?
I was tied up in traffic, but I did listen on the way up by video. And, you know, I saw people cut you off a lot, to be honest with you, and it's not my way of questioning people. I like people to give an open and honest answer and not put words in their mouth. So like, you know, for every letter we have saying that she shouldn't be reappointed, we have 1 or 2 letters saying she should be reappointed. And in your 32 years of education, experience, and training, how much weight, if you were sitting in my seat, would you put on hearing from a parole officer or autonomy Coleman who wants her reappointed, or lawyers who want her reappointed? How much weight would you put on, or would you put different weight on a parole board member saying she's great as opposed to a citizen, a lawyer, or a parole officer who's worked with her for 5 years saying that she does a great job in institutions?
I would, sir, I would hope that my support would hold some weight, although I know, you know, for many of the counselors are not familiar with me at all, but I would hope that it would hold some weight. But I do understand there are opposing point of views, and I know criticisms of individual board members and the board as a whole, and maybe even of my work. And as I've said before, there's plenty of work we have to do. We're just at the beginning of implementing some of the reforms over the last few years, and there's plenty more to do. But bottom line, I would hope that my support would hold some weight, or people that have actually done the work for a number of years, that would hold some weight, or fellow board member like Mr. Coleman, that would hold some weight with the council.
How about, like this morning, you got an email from Jason Price, institutional parole officer.
Familiar with.
Can you tell me, like, what exactly the interconnection between the nominee and Mr. Price would have been over the years?
So Mr. Price, and I'm not sure his exact start date, but I know that he initially started out with the agency through civil service as a transitional parole officer, and he may have been worked at some point and during Colette's tenure as the chief of transitional services. He was then promoted to a field parole officer position. At the time, I was the chief of field services and hired him for that. He not only had experience in parole, but he was a juvenile case worker for DYS prior to coming to parole. So we hired him as a field parole officer. He worked there for a couple of years, and then he had taken the promotional examination for an institutional parole officer and took a job at MCI Concord. I think that promotion occurred under the current chief, Chief Weatherby, but I believe Jason's got at least between his DYS time and time with parole, he's 15 years of experience in the field.
And he's a huge supporter, so she's been a consummate and diligent employee since her arrival. One of the sentences. So what exactly is his job as a quote institutional parole officer?
So he supervises, I believe he has 2 transitional parole officers under his supervision at this point. So he prepares all cases for the parole board from MCI Concord and the Northeast Correctional Center, the Concord Farm, which is the minimum and pre-release center out there. So what that involves is that in each case, they do an assessment called the LSCMI, which they're all trained and certified in. Everybody in that unit, from the TPOs up to the chief, are trained in the level of service case management inventory. Which involves an interview with the inmate prior to them seeing the board. They also gather all the law enforcement, correctional records, substance use and mental health evaluations that may be available for the board. And after their interview, they put all the materials together and present that to the board at the time of the hearing, along with correctional staff that may be available for the hearing.
I heard Councilor Duff question you at some point, and she was talking about, which is, well, I'm glad that you don't make people commute and this and that. Well, I don't think that's true, because I've heard from parole officers that sometimes they're given assignments, they travel an hour and a half, 2 hours
Yes.
for the day, and then they travel 2 hours back home. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have a number of staff that have to travel quite a distance. And I would say in terms of board members, sometimes they do travel a great distance. I would say recently, while we're going through the transition with new board members, we have one board member who's going to travel, and we mentioned Pittsfield earlier, that's going to travel to Pittsfield, that's never been there before. I would agree with Councilor Duff, that's not the ideal deal for, at least for the board members. But in terms of parole officers, field parole officers, they're assigned a vehicle and they go wherever they are assigned until they can get a closer assignment, transfer to a closer assignment based on seniority.
And of course, we're all interested in recidivism rates. The whole idea is to send people back to jail and get them healthy and productive members of society. Would you say that some parole officers, some parole board members go to prison where the population is less likely to be a recidivism stat, and it would be difficult? I'm thinking in my mind that there are so many factors that go into, what prison does she get sent to compared to Tommy Coleman or someone else? And is there more parole rate out of that institution? And what's the recidivism rate of every institution you go to? I mean, so how do you calculate that and say, oh, she's got a 59.3 and someone else got a 73.7? But there's so many factors. So do you have an answer to that? Like, how do you?
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. So for instance, if someone's doing hearings at Sousa Baronel's, which is the maximum security prison, you're dealing with people not only with serious offenses, but have significant and serious adjustment issues within the Department of Corrections, such that they're at that facility. And you may have somebody that's at a pre-release center who has completed all their programming and is transitioning to the community, may even have a job by the time that they see the parole board. So obviously that individual is a much better candidate. So you look at, you'd have to look at that as a factor as well. Yes.
I'm gonna ask you an open-ended question because, sometimes it's not a criminal trial, you're not on a witness stand, but sometimes you might feel like that. So is there anything that we haven't asked you yet that you'd like to say, about the nominee?
And again, I just don't want, if there's criticisms of the agency that we need to work on, I need to take those back and work on those issues. But I just wouldn't want to see that affect or impact Santa, who has the history of work in the corrections field, has now been with us over 6 years of what I think is exceptional service to the agency and to the Commonwealth. And I don't want any issues that the agency has, and maybe some issues that came up with people who are unhappy about personnel decisions that have been made in the past, that impacts. I would also want to speak, and I do take what Councilor Early said seriously. I would not want anybody within this agency to feel the fear of retaliation if they do have a complaint. I would want that grievance brought forward so that we can deal with it directly. I wouldn't want this undercurrent of unhappiness. It needs to be, in order to get to the bottom of the facts. That needs to be put to paper to me, and I'll handle it. I would not tolerate retaliation against, having been a union member myself, and having worked with the two primary unions that cover over half of our staff, I don't want anybody, and I asked them if they have complaints to bring them forward if they're, and they stated unhappiness with various management actions at various times, but without specifics, without somebody putting a pen to paper, I can't do anything about it. And if people feel that there's going to be retaliation, I feel badly about that because I would want to address whatever it is and not make people feel that way. But again, I don't want that to affect to Board Member Santa in this situation, given her years of service and what she's done for the agency and the Commonwealth over the last several years. And I would also add, and I think it's that, you know, we have, not only is she eminently qualified for the job, she's also a diverse candidate, which I don't think we have enough. Her, I agency, and I think it's a loss for the Commonwealth. Regardless of all the other discussions about paroling rates and recidivism rates, it's a loss for all of us in this room, if he is not confirmed. So I don't want any criticism of the agency to impact who I think this fine professional sitting to my.
I just want to say that I spent 30 years as a law enforcement officer, 9 as chief of police, and not all my employees loved me on any given day. So I appreciate where you're coming from. I can't believe it either. But I appreciate your service to the Commonwealth and appreciate you being here today. And I appreciate the fact that you offered, when Councilor Hurley, that you'd come back and speak to us about issues that the council may have as a whole outside of a hearing for nominees so that it doesn't get dumped on a nominee's back. We can talk to you about. Thank you.
Councilor Ferreira, how could anyone not like you?
I find it hard to believe. There are a couple
Very
of crazy people out there, you know?
Yeah, that's true. So I do have a few questions. Thank you for,
Just Gabe.
thank you. Sorry, last one here. So, in your role and your experience, what makes a good parole board?
I think to have a good board, and this is, again, it's my opinion, and also looking at sort of the actual, I think what we're looking for is to make sure that we have a variety of perspectives on the board, that have minimum qualifications that are a variety of perspectives, which I do think, despite criticisms we have on this board, we have a forensic psychologist, we have a defense attorney, we have a former prosecutor, we have somebody experienced in corrections, we have a board member who has many years, more years of service than to the agency as well. So I think those combination of perspectives and experience are important on the parole board. I do think it's important to have the behavioral health aspect of it, and we have, and actually I correct myself, we have 2 forensic psychologists with the board. My understanding is that Dr. Gavin will be starting on August 22nd with us, which I think that's a welcome addition to the board. But I still think you want to have that rounded out variety of perspectives and experiences and lengthy experience, and I think we have that.
Is it in the practice of the board, does the board take input from the professional staff, the officers, et cetera?
Yes, and they'll give, and I don't know what various weight that board members get, but they do get the assessments that are done by the staff members. I'm not sure because I'm not at institutional hearing as far as to what extent they're asking for that.
But it's not barred to have input from parents. So there's a lot of input coming from corrections, no matter what, no matter the board composition. Would that be fair to say? So when I look at the information to be considered in parole release decisions in the state regulations, I see the ability to evaluate a risk and needs assessment, ability to evaluate what's available in the community as far as work opportunities, education, treatment programs, evaluate behavior while incarcerated, to process witness statements, and to potentially seek a mental health evaluation if it's deemed necessary. So when I hear those, I hear the need for someone who's in touch with the community resources and programs, independent of this nominee. That's what I hear, is someone who's familiar with the community resources and has whatever experience they've cobbled together to be able to make those evaluations about someone's mental health, about the needs that would either make them successful or non-successful. Would you say that's fair to say?
I think that would be helpful.
Because when I hear that, I'm not sure some of the backgrounds we hear talked about, I'm not sure that they're necessary to fill that role or not. And I'll leave that there. So I just want to get clarity also on things we heard before to tie them up. So the ACA accreditation, what's the benefit to the Commonwealth to earn that accreditation?
I think the only benefit to that is that it sets at least, it's to me, and again, I would agree with Councilor Duff on that. I wouldn't overemphasize the significance of it, but there's a minimum standard that every agency should make. And you know, Councilor Ferrero was a police chief. There were standards
Sure.
for police agencies.
If I could interrupt, I'm sorry, could I interrupt you for a sec?
And we were accredited, thank you.
In the public sector, I've worked in education, and I've seen the accreditation process that high schools and middle schools go through to get accredited, which sometimes is tied to funding. There's all sorts of things that are consequential about that. And in that process, having led that process, it was really about generating a process of self-reflection and continual improvement. So we're taking this step back data analysis, big picture stepping back, and then we're coming up with recommendations to improve, and we're measured against some kind of matrix of some kind of framework of evaluation. Is that what happened essentially?
Yeah, I mean, they're looking.
You don't need to go too much in depth because I'm sure someone will ask nominee.
I think Board Member Santa could probably speak better to that.
Okay. And I'm going to try not to repeat what's been said. Along the release and revocation rates, why, I guess I'm going to ask you, why is there hesitation on your part? Why do you think that, I assume folks above you or your team, why do you think there would be any hesitation? Why wouldn't you be able to commit right now to produce that information?
I think this, from you know, my perspective, good in terms of when you get into release rates for board members, there's a concern with how that's used as some form of litmus test for whether or not they're appropriately applying the standard in each case. Given a variety of different institutions and places, and also that we're getting into areas. I know individual decisions, for instance, when the board issues a life sentence decision, their individual votes, it's just on release for safety purposes.
Sure.
So part of that plays into it, but I would want, if the council is saying that they've gotten that information in the past, I would want to go back and look at that and find out, okay, what can we do to satisfy the council's request? And
So I'm the newest counselor. I've never seen anyone produce any kind of data like that for us. To me, it speaks to transparent, like as a counselor, there's 2 points of data I would like to see. The approval and denial rates, which the only thing it tells me is, I look at all the board members, is someone way off? Is someone way off? That's all I want to see. I don't want to judge them and say, how come it's 65 and not 60 or whatever. I want to say, wow, you're at 22 and everyone else is averaging 50. What's going on? Or vice versa, right? That's one data point I want, approval denial rates. The second data point I want is the revocation rates. And I want the revocation rates tied with the approval denial rates, because in my mind, revocation is really about A, the determination initially whether they're prepared to re-enter, and B, have the conditions placed on them been placed reasonably and appropriately. So if I release someone because I want my stats to look good, I want to have a high release rate, and I put these absurd conditions out there that create an inevitable revocation, then the number doesn't tell me anything. Do you know what I'm saying? It seems like things could be hidden in the numbers. And then when it comes to like a panel of three, when there's a panel of three, do we have the data on each individual's vote or do we just have the panel vote? And I apologize, I know this came up, I want to keep it straight. When there's a panel of three, do we have the individual numbers or do you have them as a department?
I would think that we would be able to extract the individual on a panel, although if you have a full three-member panel, you know, you may have two that vote for and one against, and you could pass that out, I would suppose, but the ultimate decision is the decision, you know, that panel decided to parole, or maybe two sit denied and one was in favor. You know.
Again, as a counselor trying to evaluate a sitting member, this is the first time I've had a sitting member for reappointment. Transparency is important for me. I need to be able to see what's going on. I tried to get, you know, when I try to get video of lifer hearings, I have to get a DVD. I mean, why? Why isn't that online?
We have a digitization program that's going into effect over the course of the next year. So we would have a little bit easier way to access that.
Now I want to ask you about a couple of things that came up, and I know you're relatively new to the role, but I want to know what's going on in the department. So the March 2021 State Auditor's Report, are you familiar with that?
Right.
And so something that came up earlier was timeliness, and timeliness seems to have been a problem for a while. And maybe it's resources, maybe it's other stuff. Do you know what the department has done to address the auditor's report and its findings?
And which specific finding, in terms of the?
This is an example. So the findings I'm looking at, that the parole board did not conduct required risk and needs assessments within mandated timeframes. And then second finding was the parole board could not provide documentation to substantiate that parolees received all required reentry forms.
So in the first instance, I think, and I did have a lot of discussions with the actual team that came out. Actually didn't come out, a lot of it was virtual because it was during the pandemic that we were dealing with the auditor's office. So in 55 of the 60 cases that they examined on those reassessments, they done in a timely manner. There were 5 cases in which the timeline, the assessments were done. If you look at our response to it, the assessments were done in those additional 5 cases, but they did not necessarily meet the timeline. So one of the things that I think played into that, and let me just back up too, because there's 2 parts in terms of assessments. And I will say, there's an assessment that's done prior to a parole board hearing. We were 100%. There were no findings in terms of cases that come before the parole board prior to release. That's 100%.
They were prepared. In other words, no one showed up and their file wasn't prepared. Yeah.
Unit.
Right.
They were 100% in terms of getting those assessments done and before the parole board. It was on the field side once they would get out those reassessments, and there were those 5 cases. Again, the assessments were done. They were late in terms of timelines. And one of the things that we found that's been successful in the past when we've had issues with various things in the field is the field parole officer, who should basically have, doing their work on a monthly cycle, when they get reminders within our database prior to an assessment being due, it'd be more successful. What was happening in the systems, they were getting those reminders when it was overdue. Sure. So, what we did is we worked with the vendor that deals with that database, not the board people, but to implement to do that. Took some time, believe it or not. I thought it would, to me, I'm not a tech guy, press a button, we can do this. But they implemented that within the last several months, so that now parole officers in the field should be getting a notice prior to that reassessment being. And again, I would say in all 60 cases they examined, there was a reassessment, but there was they were late in those 5 cases. And then in terms of the documentation, so the most critical document for a parole is the parole permit itself, which has all the conditions of parole. That's given to a parolee cannot leave an institution without their parole permit. It has to be signed off by the parole board and the superintendent or designee at the institution. So there was, in 59 of 60 cases examined, parole permits were given to, well, they were given in all 60, but as far as having that copy on the file at the time that they examined it, there was one case in which it was missing. And again, we had this was during the pandemic, we were trying to get hard copies, we had a lot of administrative staff. I don't want to make too many excuses on this.
Yeah.
It should have been there. We did have an electronic indication in our database and a copy within our database that this permit was given to this individual. The other documents have varying significance that there was, in terms of
So I'm sorry, and just not to go too down this rabbit hole, but so are you suggesting that it was a technology infrastructure issue?
No, not in that particular case. I think in that case,
Or just in general, but yeah, you can stick.
someone didn't have a copy in that particular central office file.
Okay, so like a protocol issue?
Permit, but they didn't have a copy of the signed permit in that central office.
Is that, yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So are those the kind of things that the accreditation process would also reveal?
I don't think that's examined.
Is it in a self-audit? And I'll say those questions. So, clemency. So there's been now in 7 years, there's been 2 commutation hearings. Help me understand as far as the parole board goes. I know many of my counselors agree that 2 is not enough, given there's been hundreds of applications. Who's making the decisions whether or not to grant a hearing or not on a petition?
So those are made by the parole board in their executive session as part of their deliberations. And it's probably the area, at least coming into the executive director's role, that I probably have the least knowledge about in terms of, I have pretty good fundamental knowledge of all the areas that are coming into the executive director role.
Sure.
Obviously, I hadn't dealt with. So one of the things that, when I came into my role, chair at the time, who had just become the chair a few months earlier, got a new general counsel and myself, and one of the things she said is her priority was to get moving on. Unfortunately, there was a backlog of, as this body well knows, hundreds of clemency petitions that had not been reviewed or acted upon in a number of years. So one of the things she sat down and said, we need to address this. So this isn't, I understand.
So is that happening right now?
This isn't a last few months thing. This is an effort that took place, at least to my knowledge, from late 2019.
Is that happening right now? There's been more.
It's happening on a regular basis.
Familiar?
July 28th, I'm not sure if I'm exactly right on that date, but by the end of the month, there's several hearings being held. And there are others that are in the queue too. There are some in the queue to the governor already, some that are going to him, that I would hope would land on your desk at some point in the future.
So why was board member Santa chosen for the Special Commission on Structural Racism?
I think because she, I think it's a passion of hers, and we felt that she would represent the agency well, as I think she does.
I was surprised to hear you say that you're not familiar with there being discomfort among staff in the department, because I received over a dozen phone calls and a bunch of anonymous letters. The letters, you can send a letter and hide behind it. The phone call and telling me who they are is something entirely different. And as someone who works at a firm that deals with employment law, like, I'm hearing the trembling in these people's voices, terrified. And I don't, it seems like it's pervasive, that it's not any one person. And that really concerns me, because it's difficult work to begin with. And so again, having worked in education as far as a public sector employee, and someone got waived because they couldn't pass the MTEL, which is the teacher test, or when someone jumped the line to become an administrator, that's the quickest way to ruin a department. You ruin the department, ruin it. The video that Councilor Duff was referring to, I would hope the department's aware of it. And as far as complaints go, even regarding the issue that was brought up around the civil service exam, I'm looking at a Civil Service Commission decision where the person in question had failed, and the excuse was that, or hadn't submitted things, and the excuse was that the computer had froze. And the nominee testified that, yes, she was next to her and the computer froze. So this is someone who waited to the last minute to get something in when she knew how important it was because she had failed the exam. So, I mean, I don't need to even think twice about why morale would be low if that's who's supervising the staff, especially if people look around and feel like people were passed over on that. I think that's a real concern. And I don't think, I know you're new in your role, still relatively new, but I think that's a real concern. And I've heard it well before this hearing, and not in connection exclusively to any one person.
And I wouldn't say that there's no discomfort, because I think there is from time to time. We do deal with criticism of various managers, but again, I would want, if somebody has a substantive complaint issue with a manager, we want that put in writing and agreed so that we could deal with it appropriately.
And this is the last thing.
Like, to me.
Yeah, no, the rumors don't help, right? And again, that's why the culture is so important. And I'll just, you know, leave with this. It sounds like there needs to be some kind of safe space for people to voice themselves, because they are fearful of retaliation. And they feel, whether justified or not, they feel they've seen it. They feel they've seen it as well. And what kind of concerns me, and it's not on you, is your hesitation to commit to bring us the data. I'm not putting that on you. To me, that speaks with a culture where it's like very guarded and very top heavy. And I just think, you know, I doubt that's what the governor wants overall. And I'm not putting that on you again, but it just seems to me the culture of the department is creating problems. And I don't think it's serving the Commonwealth as well as it could. I very much appreciate you putting up with all this questioning this morning. And thank you very much for being here. I know you're committed to the work, and that you're committed to making the department the best that it can be. Thank you. Councilor Devaney.
As a point of privilege,
Yes.
personal privilege, the purpose of a witness who the nominee brings in is to talk in support. This witness has been questioned an hour and 25 minutes. I suggest that we have a public meeting and invite the public with the administrators of the Parole Board to talk about the administration and the deficiencies that have been brought up by Councilor Hurley and Councilor Dove. I mean, I think this is a hearing for someone for reappointment. We have many people who have sent letters, people who want to talk in opposition. I have put a motion that we only have one hearing. 7-1, I lost. I had a 1 o'clock hearing that I'm presiding, but this was squeezed in, and we have asked this man an hour and 25 minutes. He is not the nominee. I think it's important to talk about the history and the deficiencies of the agency, but this is not where it is. So let's schedule a public.
I thought you would appreciate the ability for us to ask questions that we wanted to. I got to tell you, Councilor, I'm not going to apologize for asking questions of the witness. The public expects me to do that. But your input is noted.
Recess now for the assembly, I think they.
Is the LG ready?
Governor comes in at 12 o'clock every week for an assembly and look at it. We haven't even.
We're going to recess for 5 minutes.
She is.